Thank you very much for letting us this opportunity to exchange with you on the topic of climate change adaptation for transport networks, in particularly for roads, and to present this case study for the Polish national roads. So the idea for this session is to start with a brief introduction on who are we, and then focusing on the topic of the presentation on climate change adaptation for transport, with first a reference to the framework, to the climate change vulnerability assessments for transport networks, in particularly for road networks, and then focusing on this case study of the Polish national road networks, and ending with a brief reflection on more overall picture of the context of Paris Agreement climate objectives for the road sector. So very briefly, who is JASPERS? JASPERS is a technical assistance by the European Commission and the European Investment Bank, which main aim is to support EU and pre-accession countries to prepare high quality projects for EU co-financing. JASPERS experts provide advisory support and technical assistance in different sectors, including transport and all at different stages of the project development cycle. This includes providing advice in certain specific areas and with now a strong emphasis on climate change. Here, this slide on the top provides you an overview of the countries of activity where we are providing support. In orange, the countries where we are working since the beginning of JASPER, so since 2008. In light orange is the EPA countries we are as well supporting, and blue is the countries that we are working on since this last programming period, 2014-2020, and marked already the countries for the Eastern Partnership that I will mention in a minute. And just at the bottom to give you an overview of the sectors of activity, where you can see that there is a strong activity in the transport. So as mentioned in this, they would like to refer to this EPIC, so the new facility for Eastern Partnership Investment in Connectivity, which is expected to be launched by the end of the year, beginning of 2022, and whose main aim would be to support the preparation and implementation of transport projects, combining advisory with technical assistance. So this key objective, as said, is the support for preparation of implementation, in particularly for commonly agreed priority infrastructure projects, which are coherent with the TNT Investment Action Plan. The scope of the facility would cover from more strategic advisory support in prioritization and selection of projects to more general methodological advice in horizontal topics as can be climate change, combined with more project-specific support for preparation and implementation, as well as capacity building. The EPIC will be building on three main blocks, so a steering committee, an advisory team, which will be sourced by JASPERS, and a consultancy support that would provide the technical assistance. So moving on to the topic of the session on climate change and transport. Certainly transport being identified as one of the main contributors to climate change. At the same time as well, transport is one of the sectors which is suffering the most of the climate change impacts, and these impacts are only expected to grow. Looking at the short and long term, we can see that there will be an increase of the infrastructure damage with the related operational cost, but this as well has major impacts on the users of these transport infrastructure, as well as wider economic impacts as the one that are presented in this slide. Therefore, this context certainly calls for a need of climate change adaptation action. And in this sense, already the last programming period, EU 2014-2020, included mainstreaming climate change as a requirement. And this has been only enhanced in the current programming period. Mainstreaming climate change implies the two sides of it, so mitigation and adaptation, but focusing here on the adaptation, this means the need to perform the climate change vulnerability and risk assessment to be able to identify which are the climate change risks for the project, and then integrate adaptation measures to ensure that the climate change risk is put to an acceptable level. So here, the references to the relevant guidance for under this EU co-financing programming periods, as well as the proposed framework to conduct this climate change vulnerability and risk assessment. This is the proposed recommended framework, certainly acknowledging that other recognized ones might be used. So JASPERS is providing project advice on conducting, performing this climate change vulnerability and risk assessment in different sectors, including transport sector. And here we are as well promoting to perform this assessment at the network level. Here we are providing the case of the road network, where a brochure on the topic was issued, which aims at integrating climate change into the road network management and development, so to enable that this climate change resilience is integrated when managing networks, and therefore enabling to prepare road rehabilitation programs that are adapted to expected climate changes, as well as informed decisions, planning decisions, which would be considering climate change resilience when developing networks. So now, considering all this context, we focus on the case study of the Polish National Road Network and the Polish National Road Administration, the GDKNA. So here, just in a slide to introduce you to them. Certainly, most of you are familiar. Here, a map of the national road network, which has been well developed in the last years, with being GDKNA, the Polish National Road Administration, a major beneficiary of EU co-financing and contributing to this development of the national road network. And therefore, in the context, as I was referring before, of the need to consider climate change requirements in the preparation of these projects, the National Road Administration understood there was a need as well to have a more comprehensive overview and going beyond the project level. And therefore, in 2016, the National Road Administration undertook an internal survey to understand how extreme climate events were affecting the national road network. So the survey was sent to all the regional offices to understand which extreme climate event had some kind of impact on the network. So there was some kind of intervention of the maintenance service team, either because there was some damage of infrastructure, need of traffic disruption, or simply the need of intervene of the service team. The survey required to register a precise date and location, as well as the related weather factor that was causing such an intervention. So this survey resulted in a register of more than 3,000 events over a period of 12 years. And the survey results and the initial statistical analysis were constituting a very good database to understand how this extreme climate was currently affecting the national road network in Poland. And this was the basis to set a joint project where Jasper became a catalyzer of this project for further development. So jointly, we set the project which is a structure in the stages which are presented in the slide. So stage one, building on the very sound database that allows to have an assessment of the current vulnerability assessment through different analysis and data gathering to aim at a proposal of an action plan for adaptation. So here I would like to briefly give you an overview of the different stages and the ongoing finalization of it. So stage one, as said, was this of analysis and first conclusions on the survey results, which were clearly showing that the majority of the events, 70%, were caused by three main weather factors, being extreme rain, strong winds, and heavy snows, and that those were not evenly affecting the network. The most affected roads were other national roads than motorways or expressways, since motorways and expressways are built on higher design standards and maintained as well under higher standards. The survey as well showed that 2/3 of the event had some kind of traffic disruption, which implies effects to the users and wider economic impacts, as well as a majority of them some kind of damage of infrastructure. And that in terms of the occurrence along the year, it was mainly on spring, summer, and winter. This part of the project also gathered information on the expected climate change forecast to try to understand how the vulnerability would be in future. And while Poland at the time had no numerous studies available in terms of forecast, the platform with available climate change scenarios became available. But as well, the project was informed by the analysis of the trends, which are very interestingly showing here, as in the case of the slide, these trends of increasing, for example, the case of heavy winds, yes, of strong winds at the bottom, or these maps comparison showing as well that there is particularly geographical region which is more prone to have this increased heavy precipitation. So on that basis, and mainly on the basis of the survey results, we prepare these current vulnerability maps. Vulnerability understood as how a particularly location is exposed to a certain extreme weather event. So how often were those extreme events happening? And this was reflected in this case in the green scale, combined by the sensitivity. So how big was the impact of these extreme weather events? And by how big it was understood as the damages and disruption that these extreme weather events were provoking. So combining these two dimensions, yes, the more exposed, the more sensitive is the infrastructure at that point, we can have an understanding how high the vulnerability levels are. And these maps were prepared for these three main hazards that were identified to mostly affect the national road network. So on that basis, there was as well the will to understand to have a better understanding of the impacts of this extreme weather. So majority of the impact of the events registered had some kind of infrastructure impact damage. And from those damages, majority, large number, being to other infrastructure assets, meaning signaling, noise screens, etc. And from those large number of events related to wind. And as well, another important infrastructure element affected are the pavements and embankments. Those generally affected in the case of floodings and heavy rains. We as well wanted to have an idea of the costs related to these damages for further stages of the project. And we tried to, from a subset of the data of the events register, we tried to gather data on the related cost by type of damage. These try to reflect an average damage, but as well, we try to reflect on an average damage of one of those more extreme events, like in the case of Poland was a 2010 flooding. So from one side, data on the damages, infrastructure damages, but as said, it's as well very important to realize that it's as well impacting the users and therefore has major economic impacts. In this case, 2/3 of the registered events caused some kind of traffic disruption. So we wanted to have a better understanding of the length of disruptions and on the how often. So in this table is shown for these three main hazards the distribution of the length of the traffic disruption, where we can see that a majority of events were lasting up to 12 hours. And in the case of rain, the disruption length was longer, certainly related to the fact that those impacts are more complex in terms of restoration because they are impacting embankments and having landslides issues often, etc. And a final aspect we as well wanted to understand was about the other type of impacts, like affecting the safety, the accident risk. But this, in terms of the statistics, Poland showed that the most accidents in this case happen where there is good weather. Therefore, in this case, no possibility of correlation was made for this economic impact. Following a stage of the project was the workshops with the branches of the National Road Administration to exchange and provide them with the project results up to now. So they, who are the people who know the roads from the ground, to provide their expert judgment on how they perceive this vulnerability of the network. So first, the workshop provided an exchange on the current vulnerabilities. Then people were asked to judge on how they perceive the future vulnerability of the network, considering what they have been witnessing up to now, plus the data on forecast, and to provide an assessment following the same scales. And a last part of the workshop was to brainstorm on the adaptation measures. So here, just a screenshot of some of the ideas that came on those workshops. And here we would like to highlight, for example, that it was clear for the different people from the branches that there's a need of a specific funding dedicated to climate change adaptation and resilience. This cannot be understood as a routine maintenance budget. And here just briefly to show you the last stages of the project we are working on. So from one side, on this drafting of business case to try to make the case for the adaptation. So we have started by doing an overall assessment of the current and forecasted cost of not adapting. So focusing here on the case of rain events, considering how often they happen and how often they will happen according to forecast and their related impacts as per the register, we made an initial assessment of the cost. And in parallel, we are initially brainstorming on the preparation of this action plan for the National Road Administration, which aims to provide some recommendations to integrate climate change resilience in the current management of the network, And this, for example, could be a very strong basis to set a program for climate change resilience and rehabilitation of the existing national road network. And in this sense, this links to this last slide I was referring to have a more uh, broad reflection on the topic of the Paris Agreement and climate change objectives in the context of road. So clearly for all, climate change is key priority at the EU level, at the national level, and this cascades down to the different levels. And it's clear that the transport needs to integrate this mitigation and adaptation in its strategic planning. Therefore, in the area of adaptation, we as well see this as a major opportunity for the roads, because on the basis of having an understanding of these network vulnerabilities, certainly here there is an opportunity to tackle these needs together with other main needs, as could be road safety or deployment of alternative fuels or electric charging. So building sustainable and resilient road rehabilitation and development programs. So briefly, to have a conclusion message on the identification of major needs on climate change resilience and adaptation of existing transport networks. At the same time that this is certainly a part of the key priorities of financing for the EU and for EIB.